There were two flavors of negative stress, or some people call it distress. One of them is anxiety, as you mentioned. And typically with anxiety, most of that stress comes from worrying about something that may or may not happen in the future. When we laugh out loud, our bodies release positive endorphins that provide us with health benefits, whether it's stress relief, it could lower our blood pressure. There's over 30 clinical research studies on the power of laughter in getting people to have a better health.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Wellness for Life. Today, we are going to be diving into the conversation around stress and what we can practically do and implement in our days to help support our body. We have an incredible guest today. We have Professor Pete Alexander. He is the president of Office Plants by Everything Grows, a TEDx speaker, best-selling author on stress relief, and a certified laughter yoga leader. He's also inspired students as an adjunct professor. And today, Pete is going to share his story and practical stress relief tips and how we can support our body. Thank you so much for being here, Pete.
Well, Niki, thank you so much for having me on your wonderful show, and I greatly appreciate your listeners' time as well.
Absolutely. No, I'm excited. I think this is a big conversation that we all want to hear more about. And I think it's important to hear different approaches to how we support stress, because for everybody, it's going to look a little bit different. Meditation might work well for somebody, supplementation. So I'm really interested in hearing your approaches. But before we dive into that, I'd love to kind of give listeners a little bit more understanding of your background and how you got to where you are, because you do have quite a diverse background. So what inspired you to become a specialist in stress relief?
Yeah, it's interesting. It was something that I would say I fell into. And the reason is because stress and I have had a lifelong relationship with each other. I unfortunately grew up in an extremely dysfunctional family. And as that experience progressed, I didn't learn how to deal with the stress properly. And when I became a working adult, I basically just tried to ignore the stress instead of dealing with it. And the problem with that is, as we continue to let that stress bottle up inside of us, it becomes really toxic. And so I just kept on, ignoring all of the symptoms that my body was sending, early warning signs. And it continued to get worse until it was 2008. And I had a perfect storm of stressful activities going on, both personally and professionally. And what ended up happening is I lost 30 pounds in 30 days. And what's interesting about that, at first, I was in my mid 40s. And at first I was really excited. I hadn't lost weight since my early 20s. And I thought, this is fantastic. I'm pretty much eating whatever I want. I haven't done any special exercise, just doing my normal exercise. And the weight kept on coming off. So after the 30th pound, I decided, well, I better have the doctor look at this. Ran blood tests. And sure enough, the doctor came back and said, looks like you have stress-induced diabetes. And no one in my family other than a distant cousin had diabetes, at least nothing, no record, nothing in 3 generations. And as a type A personality, work. Of course, what did I do? Instead of saying, I better take care of my health, I said, fine, I don't have time for this. I got to keep working. And so what I continued to do was burn the candle at both ends for another 10 years until 2018. And I ended up in the emergency room 1 hour from being comatose and an extended stay in ICU with a severe case of diabetic ketoacidosis. And for the listeners who may not know what that is, basically my body was eating itself alive because of my stress. And here's the crazy thing about this. So you would think that I would do something about it. Well, on my second day in ICU, I had gone back to corporate world because a former boss had asked me to come help him out, and then he had left that company, and so I had a micromanager. I was in my mid-50s, and I had a micromanager. And at about 6 o'clock in the morning on my second day in ICU, I get this text from my micromanager that says, "You have a webinar you need to run at 8 o'clock. What are you going to do about it?" And this micromanager knew I was in the hospital, knew that my wife had sent messages that he's in the emergency room, he's in ICU, and I get this text. And lo and behold, I didn't have my work laptop with me in the ICU. I just had my phone. So there I was pushing the envelope of what that phone could do to reschedule that webinar. And when I was first admitted to the hospital, my blood sugars were so high that the medical grade glucometers could not read them. They only just said they were high. And so they had to manually estimate what my blood sugars were. They came back with 8 to 10 times higher than normal. Well, on the second day, my blood sugars had come back down. They were still high, but they were more reasonable numbers. And as the nurse that was on staff at that time came over to me, they were checking my blood every half an hour. So, if you think you sleep in the hospital, that's farthest from the case. And so as I'm sitting there trying to reschedule the webinar, the nurse takes my blood, and like a 90-degree angle, my blood sugar starts skyrocketing straight back up. And she says to me, matter-of-factly, she says, "You realize that's what put you in this hospital bed in the first place." And that was my epiphany moment. My friends, family had all told me that I was stressing myself out. But here was somebody who was pretty much a complete stranger who had no skin in the game to give me that word of advice. And so for the next couple of days that I stayed in ICU, I really started contemplating what I was doing. And I realized that I had been trading my health for my career. And that's a very bad trade. And so after I got out of the hospital, I had no choice. I had to resign that position. And with a micromanager, I was not sorry to do that. And I started focusing on my health for the first time in my life. And so I started experimenting with different stress relief tools and techniques. A lot of them worked. Some of them didn't. But what I noticed was that not only by utilizing these tools did my stress start going down, but my blood sugars as a diabetic went down, my weight went down, and my energy level went way, way up. It was as if I had discovered the fountain of youth. And the crazy thing, Niki, is that if you saw a picture of me back in 2008, when I was first diagnosed with the diabetes, and you see me now, other than a little bit more gray hair in my head, I actually look younger today than I did back in 2008. That's nuts. That's what stress does to it. It ages us rapidly. And, for me, the sad thing is that it was my pancreas that finally was the weakest link in my body's chain. I mean, but my body was giving me all these signals so much, years in advance that that I needed to address things. And, I ignored it. I just kept on keeping on work, stressing. And so, our bodies just keep up ramping up the warning until have no choice. And, the sad thing is that for so many people who burn themselves out like I did, they're now stuck with chronic disease. And, had I listened to my body back 10 years before that happened, I could have avoided having diabetes. And now I have to deal with that for the rest of my life. And it's not a fun thing to deal with.
I appreciate you laying that out. I think that gave us some really good information to unpack. And I just appreciate hearing your story and your journey. There's a few different things I want to talk about, but the very first thing that comes to mind is I'd love to kind of push this out for the listeners, because I think a lot of times, I know on my podcast, I've communicated anxiety. You're talking a lot about stress. And I don't know if I've ever really discussed the difference between those. And so you said you experienced stress from a very early age, and, a lot of this stuff is stress. I just love to hear your approach of, what do you mean by stress, and what did that look like in your life?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Well, so during the research for my book, I discovered that there's actually good stress and bad stress. So good stress, there's actually a word for it. It's called eustress, eustress. And eustress, or good stress, is the kind of stress that we have whenever, let's say, we're working on a project that we're excited about, we're passionate about, something that we really we've got a lot of energy around. Well, typically, with any project, there's some sort of deadline, let's say. And the stress to make that deadline when we're working on something that we really like, that's actually good stress. We need that to motivate us to get things done on time. What I discovered, though, was that there were two flavors of negative stress, or some people call it distress. One of them is anxiety, as you mentioned. And typically with anxiety, most of that stress comes from worrying about something that may or may not happen in the future. And, let's say we have to have a difficult conversation with someone. And our human nature is we start worrying about it, that it's going to go terribly. And so we're stressing about that and stressing about that and stressing about that. Well, the problem is that if we continue to send that negative energy towards what may or may not happen in the future, we end up potentially manifesting a negative outcome. So instead of worrying about how a conversation will go terribly, I always suggest to people, think about it or visualize 5 seconds after that conversation ends, the last word in that conversation. And then you imagine that other person either smiling, you're shaking their hand, maybe giving them a hug. And if you do that, instead of worrying about it going terribly, you'll notice that the anxiety about that potential future event goes down, because we're imagining a positive outcome as opposed to a negative outcome. So anxiety is definitely one of those bad flavors of negative stress. The other one is just the opposite. When we start ruminating about something that happened in the past. And typically this is very common with guilt. We're either we have guilt for something we either did or didn't do in the past. And unfortunately, in the past, we can't change it. It's in the past. We can take the positive learnings from it. And if we can forgive ourselves for whatever we either did or didn't do and be able to move on from that, we can let it go. So if we can get a handle on ruminating about the past and anxiety about something that may or may not happen in the future, all other stress will be a piece of cake, because those two are the ones that really churn inside of us and create this toxic environment.
Absolutely. And it's a skill that takes time to develop and to implement. And it's something that sometimes you have to do on a daily basis to remind yourself. And, it is challenging. One thing I think about too, and I love you laying these out, is for me, anxiety feels more of like the symptom, whereas stress is the actuals that are happening in your life. Overworking, all the things, the tangible things that are happening. But to your point is there is good stress. Working out is good stress on the body. And so there's an importance, and to distinguish between the two, and that you need those. But when we're going too far in the bad or distress, the implications that can happen. And just like you, I ended up in the hospital from burning the candle at both ends, and it could be incredibly scary. And so if we can know those warning signs ahead of time, like you mentioned, and I think for everybody, they're a little bit different and unique to their situation, but I think there's some obvious signs that either we are pushing under the rug, we know that they're there, but either we don't want to believe them. I also think there is a distinction between, and there's many differences, but between men and women. And I have these conversations with clients and all, colleagues that there's somewhat of a push of like not wanting to own anxiety or stress for men, but women, it's a little bit easier. Obviously, this is more of a generalized conversation. And so men, they got to tough through and, and sometimes they have to be the provider and the leader of the household. So they need to be the strong ones. It's a little bit easier for them to kind of acknowledge maybe something like anger. Whereas for women, it's more of those softer emotions that it's easier. And so I can see how this could very commonly happen with individuals. You just got to press through. You got to work through it. And we need to either provide for my family or, this is a part of life. And we just got to continue to do that. You mentioned early on that there were some warning signs for you. What did those look like?
Yeah. So early warning signs for me in particular, the very first one was back and shoulder stiffness. And I realized later on that because my primary job was sitting at a desk, that I was hunching over when I was stressed at the desk. And that puts a lot of pressure on your back and shoulders. So that's a common one. And of course, I didn't listen to that. In fact, when I ended up with the diabetes, right before I was diagnosed, my back actually locked up. My dad, one of the things that were going on was my dad was in hospice and needed all of his affairs taken care of. And my back, I could not stand, sit, walk, anything without the pain. And literally, I remember being on the tile floor of that hospice room because lying on the floor and I was talking to my dad in his hospital bed was the only way that I wasn't in an excruciating pain with my back. My back had given out several times before, and it was like, but there was no rhyme or reason for it. It was just what I was doing. So that was one. Another one was sleep disorder. So I would have problems sleeping, especially trying to get to sleep, because I was a very lightweight, or I am a lightweight sleeper. I do not end up be sleeping deeply. I am always light sleeping, so I wake up at any weird sounds or anything like that. And so I was having insomnia, left and right, because what was I doing? I was worrying about things that I either had to get done or things that may or may not happen. Or again, going back, I would worry about things I either said or didn't say. And, so I let that chew me up. Another one was headaches. I noticed that I was waking up and I was having headaches pretty much almost daily or every other day. And so I was reaching for that Excedrin bottle, and, that's not healthy. And it was just a regular thing that I would continue to do. And then of course the weight fluctuation, dropping that weight, it was like, okay, it is what it is. Another one too, a little bit more mental, was a lack of concentration, because I always, fancied myself as somebody who could focus. And when I was overly stressed, I couldn't focus. I could not get the job done cleanly, effectively, because I was constantly worrying about something else or being distracted by whatever else was stressing me out. So those all were ones that I found were issues. Fortunately, I didn't resort to drug or alcohol addiction. That I know a lot of people, sadly, that ends up being something that they do. And reason I didn't do that is because that's part of what I had to grow up with stuff around me. And I told myself that I needed to do whatever I could to get out of that environment. So I took on the hero role as a kid, and and so it was my ticket out of that chaos.
Absolutely. That's incredible testimony to your growth and development. I mean, being raised in a, environment like this, I mean, I hear a lot of times there's kind of two options. You either dive back in and kind of repeat the same story, you run far away from it, and it's obviously if you have a smooth life after, it's easy to not go down that hill. But it sounds like there's some really heavy things that happened in your life that it would be easy to, take that as an option. And you did the harder path. You implemented alternative approaches to heal your body and get to a better state. And obviously you've done it so well that now you can help others experience, similar testimonies on their own. Now, implementations for different strategies for stress that can look different for so many different individuals, but what has been successful for you? And, and I just want to say, this stuff doesn't happen overnight. There's some tools and practices you can use that do help in the moment. But a lot of times, like you said, you were 10 years living in, and I correct me if I'm wrong, did you get the diagnosis of the stress-induced diabetes and then you were continuing to live in a stressful state for 10 years? Okay.
Yes.
So that didn't happen overnight. It was a long time of putting, the heat to your body and the pressure on your body, and our bodies are incredibly resilient, but at some point we break. And so implementing these strategies might take time to be able to have this long lasting feeling where you start feeling in your groove, you start gaining energy, some of these health concerns start to drop. So as far as kind of those quick, immediate support techniques, what do those look like? And then we can kind of get into, how do you support long-term health for your stress?
Mm-hmm. Great question. So the first thing that I would do is, they say it in 12-step programs, you have to hit rock bottom. Mm-hmm. So you have to realize, okay, you got a problem. You got a problem with stress. And so acknowledging it, that's the first one. And once you acknowledge it, then it's a matter of trying to find something that you can just work with to help yourself relieve your stress. And really, it doesn't take a huge amount of time to get the benefit of a technique or two, even if it only takes 1 or 2 minutes. What you have to do is you have to make it a habit. That's the key, because clinically it shows that it takes anywhere from 22 to 60 days of doing it on a daily basis for something to become a habit. And the thing about making something a habit, a technique that you use, the compound benefits over time can be enormous, even if it's just a minute or two a day, but you have to do it consistently. And so that, realizing that, okay, let me try something. And there's certain techniques that may work for you that don't work for me, and vice versa. So you have to try different things. And like I remember when I was considering writing my book, I noticed that at the time there were a lot of books on, let's say, meditation or yoga, deep breathing, etc. And those were 200-300 page books on one technique. And what I realized was there's a lot of people like myself who, they're type A personalities, they're work. And unfortunately, they don't have a lot of time to read a long book. They have more likely 5 minutes or less before they got to go into their next stressful, situation, meeting, etc. And so trying something that only takes 1 or 2 minutes is beneficial because you try it. If it works, fantastic. Run with it. If it doesn't work, big deal. You only tried it for 1 or 2 minutes. There wasn't much of a commitment. Try something else next time. So that's another thing, is to realize that, let's say meditation, for example. A lot of people think that if they can't stay focused during meditation, that it doesn't work. That's not true. You just have to realize that your mind's going to wander sometimes. Just realize that, bring it back, and do whatever you can. If you're going to use meditation, if it works for you, fantastic. If it doesn't, okay, try something else. So you don't, be your inner critic and say, oh, I tried this particular technique. It didn't work. So all stress relief doesn't work. Don't do that. Find the technique that works for you. One of the ones that I think is wonderful, so easy to try, is kind of an extension of the conversation we had earlier about anxiety and visualizing a positive outcome. It's basically, it only takes a minute, and I'll walk you through it. And it's something that the listeners can utilize. Now, if you're listening to this, the only thing I'm going to say before I walk you through it is, if you're driving a vehicle, go ahead and press pause because you don't want to be driving a vehicle, because we're going to close our eyes. So what you do is you close your eyes and take a deep breath in. And I want you to go in your mind to a place you like to relax. Call it your happy place. Maybe it's the beach. Maybe it's a park. Maybe it's a lake. Maybe it's your backyard. Maybe it's the spa. Maybe it's your favorite chair in your home. Wherever it is, go there now and take in all of your senses. So, what do you feel? Do you feel the sun on your face? Maybe the sand or the grass under your feet? And what do you smell? Do you smell the fresh air? Maybe the lotion from the spa? Maybe you made popcorn for your favorite movie. And what do you hear? Do you hear the wind blowing through the trees? Maybe the water splashing on shore? And what do you see? Do you see the blue sky? Maybe the green of the trees or the grass? Whatever it is, take it all in, and take another deep breath in. And open your eyes. Simple visualization that can help ground you at any point, and it takes 1 minute. The key is to engage your senses as part of that. And the reason you want to engage your senses is because it tells your body to calm down.
Absolutely. I love that suggestion. It's something when I used to go to therapy that we spoke about, and it really helps you hyper focus on a situation, especially when you're focusing on a scenario that is comforting, is warming. It feels like a safe place. That only adds to the element. And it's nice because you can personalize to whatever your needs are. Exactly. So you mentioned, the visualization techniques. What other tools did you implement when you're kind of in this new stage where you're just getting released from ICU? You made the big change to resign from your job. Maybe visualizations weren't even on your radar at the point. What were some other tools that you utilized in order to start your stress relief journey?
Yeah, one of them that I consider an absolute game changer is to professionally elicit your personal values. And the reason is because, we kind of have a sense of our personal values. Oh yeah, I like this, I like that. But if you can do a technique where you can determine, let's say, your top 4, 5, maybe 6, basically I would call them the non-negotiables. Everything else is completely, a nit for your particular, situation. But those top values, those are ones that you absolutely have to have whenever you're deciding some important decision. So what's interesting about personal values work is we can do it in different areas of our life. We can do it for our career. We can do it for our family. We can do it for our relationships. You name it, our health. And what's interesting is we'll have crossovers. Personal values, the most important personal values will have crossovers in different parts of your life. Like, for example, for me, my health is my number one value across the board. And that's because of what happened to me back in 2018. Now, it's interesting because I was first trained in personal values work in the mid 1990s. And I remember that when I did that work, my top personal values did not include health. And it's interesting because I'm not alone. So many people do not put health as a priority until they don't have it. So for me, personal values, health is always number one on my list. And what's so important about that is, let's say for your career, if you're thinking about taking a new job, or let's say you run a business and you're thinking about some sort of expansion or hiring a key employee or something like that. Before you make that decision, if you can run that decision by your top non-negotiable values, if one of those values is not in alignment with that decision, you should not go through with that decision. And the reason is because when we go against our personal values, we will guarantee to add additional stress to our lives because we're not being true to ourselves. We may think, oh, okay, yeah, it's not a problem. It's, even though this isn't in alignment with, value number 2, that's no big deal. Oh, yes, it will be. It'll come back to bite you. So you always want to use that personal values list. And those, like I said, there's 4, 5, 6 at the most, but those are the ones that are so important. If you keep those values handy, if you handwrite them out, take a picture of it on your phone or you type it into your phone, but you have it handy so that the next time that you have one of those decisions that it's like, oh, I better really think this through. Part of that process should be to do making sure that it's in alignment with who you are. And that just to assume that you know what your values are, yeah, you probably have a pretty good sense. But to actually do the activity, it usually has an eye-opening kind of experience because there might be something that you didn't think was a value that actually is a very important value.
Now, I think for some values can naturally come up, especially if you've already done a practice like this. But what if somebody's listening, they're like, I have no idea what my values are. I don't know what questions to ask myself. Is there a quiz, or how do you guide an individual to figure out and assess what their values are? Yeah.
So I have actually a technique that literally takes no more than 10 minutes, 15 if they really want to take the time of that. And I can provide a link for that video. And basically there's basically 3 key questions that are asked. And what you do is, you pause the video for after each question and you do the activity. And it really does amazing thing. The only thing that you have to do is make sure that you have no distractions while you're doing that. Because if you try and do it, let's say if you work in a cubicle and it's, a lot of activity going on around you at work, it won't work. It won't be a good activity. Or at home and you've got the kids or roommates just distracting you left and right. You've got to do it in a quiet place where there's no distractions. So obviously you turn off your phone. You don't want to be doing it while you're getting texts or Slack messages or whatever pings you might be getting, because those are very distracting. But if you do that, then you'll have that clarity. And here's the really interesting thing. Our personal values over our lifetime will stay relatively the same unless a huge something happens to us. And for me, the only one that's changed over, let's say, the last 40 years is the health one, because I lost my health and I needed to get it back. So that was an impactful situation for me, and it changed it out. But, let's say if you have your top 5, chances are as you go through life, at least 3 and maybe 4 will stay the same over time.
Absolutely. And I think, when you have these set in who you are and your approach to the world, when opportunities arise and you're like, I'm not certain on what to do, you can tap into these values. I think the same goes for individually, but as a family, sitting down and, okay, what are our family values and what do we believe in? What do we prioritize? It'll help us make those bigger decisions, especially if there's some like very convicting or even convincing arguments or decisions that are presented to us that we have difficulties making that decision. When you know what your values are, it's easy to say yes or no and pursue and whatnot. I want to pivot to something unique that you've mentioned kind of prior to us recording is laughter yoga. So I think a lot of us know about yoga, and there's different approaches to yoga, but I'd love to hear what laughter yoga is. I think we can kind of get an idea, but what that looks like and why is that so beneficial for our stress?
Yeah. So it's funny. First and foremost, with laughter yoga, you do not need to bring a yoga mat. Because I always mention that because in my classes that I teach, inevitably somebody new is going to come with the mat, and it's not that kind of yoga. So laughter yoga originated back in 1995 in India by a Dr. Madan Kataria. And it has spawned into 200,000 laughter clubs throughout the world. And basically what happens is with laughter, you know how great it feels when you have a hearty laugh, even if it's for 5 or 6 seconds. Well, when we laugh out loud, our bodies release positive endorphins that provide us with health benefits, whether it's stress relief, it could lower our blood pressure. There's over 30 clinical research studies on the power of laughter in getting people to have a better health. But as smart as our bodies are and how they can repair themselves, the interesting thing about laughter yoga is that our bodies don't know the difference between a real and a simulated laugh. Only knows that we're laughing. And so whether we do a hearty laugh that just we're laughing hysterically, or we're doing a simulated laugh, the same response happens in our bodies. And the wonderful thing about laughter yoga is when you have a group of people that get together and they do a simulated laughter exercise, what usually happens is because laughter is contagious and people start laughing real laughter within, 5 seconds or so. And the other thing that you would really want to try and do with laughter yoga is realizing that when we were kids, the average kid would laugh 100 times a day. And that includes, a smile, a chuckle, etc. Unfortunately, as adults, when we have all those responsibilities, we're lucky if we laugh, chuckle, or smile 5 times a day. So what we're trying to do is reconnect with our inner child that wants to laugh and laugh about things that are completely silly things. But by doing these activities, it allows us to build relationships with each other. And what ends up happening is after the whether it's a half an hour class, an hour class, you feel so much better. And I have seen people who have come to the class, and it's amazing. I remember this mother and daughter came to class once, and clearly the mother did not want to be there. She was giving me these dirty looks, and I remember we did this one activity early on in class, and it's called argument laughter. And you pair up with another person, and one person goes ahead and pretends to be arguing with somebody, but you don't say any words. You just go ha 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 ha, whatever this is, and you're just making those indicators. And then the other person apologizes, not saying words, but laughing with a motion of apology. And you go around the room doing this. Well, she was sitting next to me, and so when it came to her arguing with me, instead of just, doing this kind of thing, she started indicating like she wanted to slap me and punch me. And I'm thinking, oh boy, this person's got some hostility. So by the end of the class, I was expecting her to just leave and never see her again. She came over to me and she said, "This was so good. I needed this so badly. Thank you, thank you, thank you." Mm-hmm. And it's amazing how this can happen. I mean, I saw another person who she had just lost her husband in an accident, and her friend got her to come to try and relieve some of that depression. And she came and she did these laughter exercises, and she started crying, and she said, "I needed to release this." It's so interesting how laughter, it's something that's so easy for us to do if we allow it. And, if we think back to some of our happiest moments, we were likely smiling, laughing, chuckling. So why wouldn't we want to tap into that again?
Absolutely. And that's pretty cool. I've never heard about that a mocked version of a laugh has the same powerful benefits as a real genuine laugh. So that's interesting. I've never heard of that. I've never heard of laughter yoga. I mean, I would assume if somebody's signing me up for that class, I'm bringing a mat with me. So very cool. And that's what's beautiful about healing and finding what works for you, and encouraging friends, yourself, to try out different things, because I'm sure you'd be surprised of what does work for you. And sometimes it takes multiple times to get into the rhythm and then to feel in your groove. But there's so many different tools out there to be able to help. And I think you touched on it, but to acknowledge, what's going on. And I also think to make a big decision, whatever the main culprit is in your life that's creating that stress, is that something that I need to proceed with, or is that something that I need to remove or alter? And that is not an easy decision. But I think it's a big decision that needs to be brought up and worked with. So I like that we lay that out. Are there, with all the individuals that you've worked with through classes, through talking engagements, I'm guessing there's some commonalities that you might see with individuals with very heavy stress loads. Are there certain things that you've witnessed or had conversations about that you recurrently see in individuals who are coming to you with very heavy stress?
Yeah, usually it has there's usually three different things. One is career issues. So they have a boss that is not a good boss, or whatever is going on, they're not happy at work. That's one. Another one is relationships. That is another one that's can be very, very, very challenging. And the third one is usually, it can be related to career, but it's financially. Those are the three that typically are ones that people stress the most about. And each of those, that's why I say that the personal values work is a game changer, because a lot of times, and most times when I've talked to people about this, they're stressing about stuff and they haven't clearly identified what's most important to them. So like, let's say for, financially, they're thinking, oh, I'm living paycheck to paycheck. And the reality though is they're living paycheck to paycheck because they're spending, a good chunk of their income on stuff they don't even need. That's not even important to them, but they don't even realize it because it's just kind of habit. They're in a habit of, I got on eBay or I got on Amazon or, I saw this, I couldn't resist it. Well, sure, you want to treat yourself here and there, but if you are spending the money as quickly as it comes out and it's not for things that are really important to you, that's actually money that's getting wasted. So being able to really be clear on what is important to you, whether it's your finances, the person, that you should be looking for as an individual. I mean, if you know what your top, let's say 5 values are as it relates to a relationship, well, when you start going on first dates, going online, seeing profiles of different people that you might consider going out with, you can start asking those questions in various ways. Now, you don't have to right on the first date say, okay, so how do you fit in each one of my 5 values? No, you don't do that. You do that. You want to be able to kind of feel them out and see what their response is and trust your gut with it. So, and then, as far as with the career, boy, it's, that one's cut and dried when it comes to the personal values work, especially if you're not happy in your current job. And if you do the personal values work, you will identify at least one value that is being compromised. And that's why you're not happy. And so you can either choose to try and remedy that situation in that current job. And there's, a lot of times people can do that. They might have been at work for a long time and they have, you've got so much invested in that organization. Yeah, there might be an opportunity for you to change your situation. But if you really can't, you've tried and it's very clear that the organization or who you're working for doesn't fit with your values, then it's time to look at a different opportunity. So all of those 3 are the ones that I hear most commonly. And career and finances often go hand in hand. And if you think about it too, a lot of times because we spend so much time with our careers, that's part of our identity. And if we're not proud of what we do, if we don't, feel good about what we do for a living, that'll come out when we're, in relationships as well. Because, happiness comes from within. It doesn't come from the other person. And so the other person will sense that you're not happy in your work as well. And so it's really important to know what your personal values are.
Absolutely. And this is something that's beneficial to do as early as you can, because when you're 10 years into a career, that's not an easy decision to pick up and leave once you acknowledge that this is not in alignment. Same as a relationship. If you're in a marriage, for individuals, there's no option, to leave or anything like this. And so to understand and confirm what those values are as early as you can is helpful. But sometimes you got to go through the mess to be able to figure out, okay, this is what I strongly value. Well, Pete, I appreciate you bringing this information and insight and providing these actionable, techniques that we can utilize in the moment on a regular basis for short-term and long-term support for listeners who want to know more about the work that you do, the talks that you lead, or even a little bit more of the laughter yoga, and maybe if they live locally to you, where can individuals find your work?
Sure. Probably the easiest is just to go to my website, which is petealexander.com. So PETEALEXANDER.com. It has my TEDx talk. It's got the videos that I do, the link to the book, there's, and my links to social media if you want to connect with me. So I usually am posting once or twice a week, different ideas. I've been doing a lot of nature stuff too. That's a wonderful stress reliever. And even, I mentioned to people that you don't have to spend a lot of time in nature, but, as humans, we are connected with nature. And if you can just be outside and not going just outside to be on your phone, but to be outside to just connect and be present. That's the other thing that's so important with any of these activities, is to remain present while you're doing the activity. Because if we let ourselves be distracted by whatever else is going on, it's kind of like multitasking. When we're trying to do this and trying to do that at the same time, well, guess what? All those things that you're trying to do at the same time are each not going to get done very well, because we can't focus our attention. Focus, be present, and realize that you're helping yourself by even spending a couple of minutes a day by doing a particular activity that you find helpful. And it's not rocket science. It's just, you got to be willing to commit to it. And, for those type A personalities who say, oh, I can't find the time. Well, okay. Go ahead and book on your calendar 5 minutes at the same time per day. Whether it's at the end of the day, whether it's the beginning of the day, you name it, just do it. Once it becomes a habit, you don't have to have it in your calendar, but maybe you have to have it in your calendar to remind you, yeah, I got to do it. And when you see that, if you put it in your calendar and you see that reminder come up, don't blow it off. Treat that reminder like you would any other important appointment, because the most important person in your life is yourself. That's why, it's funny. I remember, when we fly, the flight attendants say, put on the mask on yourself before putting it on someone else. And, I remember I was on a Southwest flight where the flight attendant actually was a pretty good, sense of humor. And she says, put the mask on yourself before putting it on a child. And then she pauses and she says, or someone acting like a child. And then she says, if you're traveling with more than one child, put the mask on the child with the most potential first. But anyway, putting the mask on yourself first, you have to realize, if you don't take care of yourself, you can't be there for the people that are important to you in your life, your career, your business. And, I've had people who said, oh, well, I can't worry about my health. I got too much to do. Okay. And then I ask, so think about the last time you were really, really sick, let's say with the flu. Did you feel like doing anything else other than lying in bed? And chances are, if they're honest, they probably couldn't do anything other than lie in bed. And if all we can do is lie in bed, we're no good to the people that are important to us in our lives, our career, our business, etc. We don't have the energy for it. So take care of your health. It's so paramount.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree with that more. Well, thank you so much for being here, P, and sharing your insight. I'll make sure to include all your contact information in the show notes below so that individuals can reach out and learn more about the work that you're doing and the information that you provide. So thank you so much for being here.
Well, Niki, thank you so much for having me on your show, and I really greatly appreciate your listeners' time as well.